Hey class, welcome back to our history subject, and we are getting into our last chapter in our American Revolution book, chapter 20, The World Turned Upside Down. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that you need to complete all of your big question discussion posts for each chapter, so that will be 20, and then also 20 assignments for chapter vocabulary. With those, please don't copy and paste your answer. Please use your own words, and you guys have been doing a great job. I just want to say that I'm proud of you for working so hard and staying on top. Some of you guys have been ahead, and then those that are getting caught up, it's really great that you are taking the time and sacrificing to be able to get caught up so you guys can all pass and have a great rest of the quarter, and then especially have a great fourth grade year even during this crazy time, and be ready for grade 5 or 5th grade. So last time we talked about how the Britons and the Great British Army decided to move and focus their fighting on the South. We talked about how they wanted to do that and be able to conquer. They knew they had loyalists, those enslaved African Americans that would fight with them and be able to, at some point, come up from the South and fight from the North with their armies and kind of sandwich the Continental Army. We also learned about Benedict Arnold, who was at one point a great member of the Continental Army, but then he ended up committing treason and left the Continental Army and joining the Great British Army. So our primary focus objectives for chapter 20 is to describe the final major battle at Yorktown, be able to explain how the Americans defeated the British, and then understand the meaning of our core vocabulary words or phrase, which this chapter just has one phrase. So you guys should all be able to get 100% on that. Okay, so before we get in, let's kind of review a little bit more about what we've kind of talked about. So no one in 1780 knew the outcome would be or when it would occur. The Americans had been pretty successful so far, so they may have expected or at least hoped to win. On the other hand, they may have been pessimistic about Benedict Arnold and other potential traitors, so not having a good outlook, thinking that things are going to turn bad because of Benedict Arnold's treason, and there's possible other traitors, people leaving, that could have undermined or taken out the legs of the American cause, and that it could have fallen apart. So the British may have also been discouraged by the victory of the Bonham Richard battle, that naval battle that happened between the Continental Army and the British Army. But however, the British were likely to be optimistic about the outcome of the war because of their superior army and their resources, right? They have been trained for a long time, had a lot of money coming over to fight. So during this chapter, our last chapter, we're going to read about the British decision to attack Virginia and the effect the French entry had on the war and on the outcome of this American Revolution. So let's call attention to our last big question. How does the chapter title, The World Turned Upside Down, explain the outcome of the American Revolution? So if the American Revolution was good for the Americans and they won, what does that mean? Why would they say the world turned upside down? So as we read, let's look for answers and reasons and details that will help us explain this chapter title. Let's begin and follow along with me. A British mistake. Another one that they make. Then Great Britain made a mistake that cost it the war. The general in charge of the British armies in the South was Lord Charles Cornwallis. Cornwallis spent a year chasing the Continental Army in the South. Then came the Battle of Kings Mountain along the North and South Carolina border. At Kings Mountain, the Continental Army defeated a large Loyalist force. Cornwallis realized the British plan for the South would not work. He decided to move his army to Virginia. If he could defeat the Continental Army in Virginia, he would crush the rebellion. In the summer of 1781, Cornwallis chose a small Virginia town called Yorktown for his base. Yorktown is located on the York River, which flows into the sea. At Yorktown, the British Navy could bring Cornwallis troops and supplies. So very efficient. Now let's look at this map. So this is the map of the Battle of Yorktown. You get your naval ships out here, the naval fleet, be able to bring in supplies and troops effectively and efficiently right here coming in to this river. So normally it's not a good idea to set up a base with the river behind you. If you have to retreat, you have no place to go, but Cornwallis felt safe there. He had 1/3 of all the British soldiers in America with him. The British Navy would bring him even more if he needed them. So now Washington is going to respond, and what is going to happen? While Cornwallis set up his base at Yorktown, George Washington was meeting with the French general in Rhode Island. The French general Rochambeau had brought an army to help the Americans. A large French fleet was on its way. Washington and Rochambeau planned to attack the British armies in New York City. Then the news about Yorktown arrived. Washington immediately saw Cornwallis's mistake. "Forget about attacking New York," he said. "The American and French armies should hurry to Virginia." Together they had enough men to trap Cornwallis. If the French fleet could get there in time, it could keep the British Navy from helping Cornwallis. Then Cornwallis would have to surrender. In one single victory, Washington might end the war. Yorktown was 500 miles away. George Washington started his military career with a 400-mile journey. That first journey ended in disappointment. This second opportunity could be the victory of a lifetime. It took more than a month for the American and French armies to reach Yorktown. It took a few more days to dig a great half ring of trenches around the town. On October 9th, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the first cannon was fired. The Battle of Yorktown had begun. For once, General Washington had the most guns and cannons. For once, General Washington had the most men. Cornwallis looked to the sea for help. None came. The French fleet had driven off the British fleet. Cornwallis's army was on its own. That's a big mistake. He thought he could have help from his fleet, but did not happen. Each day, Washington moved his army closer, tightening the half ring around Yorktown. Washington rode among his men, despite the risk that a bullet might strike him. His soldiers cheered and pressed on. Cornwallis was trapped. For several more days, American cannons roared. Finally, the British general saw that it was useless to continue. On October 17th, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. So the American Revolution ended soon after the surrender at Yorktown. 2 days later, the American and the French armies formed two long lines. The defeated British forces marched between them and left the town. As they did, a British army band played the tune of a nursery rhyme. A strange tune to play at a time like this, but the words made sense to the British. If buttercups buzzed after the bee, if boats were on land, churches on sea, if ponies rode men, and if grass ate the corn, and cats should be chased into holes by the mouse, if the mamas sold babies for half a crown, if summer were spring and the other way round, then all the world would be upside down. So half a crown, this is our one vocabulary phrase. Let's read this together. A unit of money used by the British during the time of the American Revolution. So a group of citizen soldiers had defeated one of the world's greatest armies. A group of colonies had won independence from a mother country for the first time in history. So as we're reading this is helping us understand and answer the big question. The United States of America had been created. The great British Empire had been humbled. In the peace treaty that followed, Britain agreed that the colonies were now free and independent states. All right, a final word. The American Revolution produced many heroes, such as John Paul Jones and Francis Marion. George Washington, the famous general, became known as the father of our country. For his leadership during the war and after, Most of the heroes, though, were ordinary people. Their names were not written in the history books. They were the Minutemen on Lexington Green. They were the soldiers who shivered at Valley Forge. They were the men who dashed out of their swamp hideouts to strike at the British Army. They were also the women who brought food and water to the men in battle. They were the women who took care of the wounded and the sick. They were the women who kept farms and shops running. They were the farm families who shared their food with American soldiers and the townspeople who gave them housing. They were the women, children, and old men who made weapons and gunpowder for the Continental Army. They were the children who helped produce the food and clothing that the American soldiers needed to survive. When the war was over, people everywhere asked, how could the American colonies have won a war against one of the greatest military powers in the world? The answer was not difficult to find. The Revolutionary War was won because ordinary Americans refused to lose it. I just want to thank you all again for joining me in history and joining me throughout this book. It's awesome to read and learn all about this Revolutionary War. I hope you enjoyed it. Those that need a little help with the big question, some key points and hints that you should have about the chapter title. Remember, we can read it right here. The world turned upside down. It means that these events did not turn out as expected. The British had a bigger army or a smaller army than the Continental Army? Were they more well trained or were they not? Should the British, looking at it like statistically, should they have won? They were expected to win easily in a war against the colonists, but the colonists instead, who were not well organized, won, defeating the greatest empire in the world at that time. So that's why the world was turned upside down. For the first time in history, a country was born by leaving its mother country. That is it. Thanks again for joining me. If you guys have any questions about history or any other subject, please reach out to me and I can help you out. Remember, please use your own words with the big question discussion post and then use the definition for your one vocabulary phrase in this chapter. And then I will see you guys in the next lessons. Have a great rest of the quarter. Good luck in your unit assessment, and I'll see you next time.